Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming. Thanks for welcome to those who are just filtering in. We're just starting now. Today we have Dr. Cliff Sadof with us. Cliff is a professor of entomology at Purdue. He is a pest management specialist for ornamentals and a gardener extraordinaire. So Cliff, and I should also say he develops and has developed some of the programming for the master gardeners. So those of you in the audience who are gardeners may recognize Cliff. And today he's going to talk to you about his experience with managing gardens in the fall for pollinators. So I will let Cliff take over, but just as a quick reminder to everyone on there and anyone who's new, if you have a question, feel free to drop it in the Q&A. It's in the bottom right. It says Q&A, and you can type that there. And then when Cliff is ready, he can start answering those. As well, if you really want to, you can also talk and chat in the chat box. So there's also a chat icon there in the middle. Feel free to use that to as well for questions. We'll monitor it, but the Q&A is there for questions. Yeah, I think that's it. So we'll get this going. Cliff, to you.
All right. Great. Thanks. It's nice to be here. Welcome to my basement. You'll see why I garden, so I can get outside a bit. So anyway, before I get started, I just wanted to get an idea of what who I'm talking to. So I guess if you could in the chat just say a note whether or not you're if you're a beekeeper, let me know if you're a beekeeper or if you are a master gardener or you're in the nursery industry, something like that. That'd be great. Bee scientist. That's Brock. Okay. Beekeepers. Okay. Beginning beekeeper. Great. And I'm just sort of reading these things as we go along. Beekeeper. Lots of beekeepers. Good. Hobby beekeeper. Okay. Good. Well, this is good. So beekeeper and habitat gardener. Okay, Shelby County beekeeper. So many of you are beekeepers. This is good. And master gardeners, a few popping up here or there. Well, great. This is good. I was really happy when Brock asked me to put this talk together because he got me to think about what I like to do most in my free time, which is garden. And so he told me about this in the springtime. So I was able to take some nice photos over the course of the summer to demonstrate, what happens in gardens with pollinators. So I'm going to switch now and share my screen and start on the PowerPoint. And I'll share the screen. And I'm going to turn it to the slideshow mode. Okay, slideshow mode. Okay, so you should see a big screen in front of you that says, let's see, let's make sure I get this thing that says participants, Q&A. Okay. So you should all see in front of you a big screen that says keeping plants and pollinators happy. And that's the goal of my presentation today is to help you figure out how to keep your plants healthy so that they can provide the pollen and nectar that's necessary to keep the pollinators healthy. So I know even though most of you are beekeepers here, we do know that there are a lot of other pollinators that are in the pictures. We've got hummingbirds, we've got monarch butterflies, we've got moths, we've got bumblebees and the like. And so there are about 200,000 animal species that pollinate 250,000 species of flowering plants. So the combinations are somewhat endless. More than 99% of them are invertebrates, so bees, wasps, butterflies, moths, and flies, and beetles. And then, of course, we've got just a few. We got bats, and we've got hummingbirds. Okay, I guess I'd have to push this button here. Okay. Wow. Okay. All right. So in terms of the pollinator diversity, this is an idea of the types of insects that are pollinators. So the top row are a lot of these solitary bees, and then the bottom row we've got apidae. There's a honeybee in there somewhere, and there's some wasps and parasitic wasps, and even on the lower right there's a syrphid fly. So we actually have flies that are involved in this as well. Uh, so there are over 4,000 species of bees that are native to North America, and most of them are solitary nesting species. So what I want to do today is, give you a feel for how you can manage your pollinator garden to keep those solitary bees happy. So what are the key elements of a pollinator habitat? Well, of course, there are flowers, which is probably what got me interested and involved with that, because they are, and then we also have nesting sites. All right, so in the flowers, we need to have season-long blooms so that we can have uh, pollen and nectar being accessible to the pollinators when they are out and about. Okay, now those of you who are beekeepers, your honeybees are going to be out uh, all season long, but with some of the solitary bees, some are out only for distinct periods of time. So this general strategy is if you have something blooming in your garden with a wide variety of morphology and shapes and colors, you're going to be attracting a wide variety of pollinators. Now there are some for the non honeybee pollinators. A lot of them are soil nesters. So we need undisturbed bare soil, and then we also, and some of them actually like to take up residence in old rodent burrows. Others are cavity nesters. They will drill holes or take up residence in hollow, pithy stems of whether they're woody plants or they might be perennials. And they also might take up residence in logs with holes that maybe been attacked, by a borer. So this sounds pretty simple, but there are some challenges in order to maintain pollinator habitats. To get season-long blooms, you really have to come up with the right combination of flowers. And if it's going to be in somebody's property, it's got to look good. And that can be a problem because, uh, some of these pollinators, like Joe Pyeweed is a nice pollinator, but it gets powdery mildew really badly, and so you don't want to be looking at ugly powdery mildew, infested plants all season long. So some of the practices that we have for increasing the number of flowers, kind of is at odds with practices that protect plant health, and I'll talk about this, about how to manage this in a little bit. In terms of soil nesters, one of the problems is it's really hard to keep areas of your garden uncultivated. I tend to like to hoe about my plants to get rid of the weeds, but when you do that, you can really disturb some of these soil nesters. So, some sort of timing is going to be necessary in order to be able to keep the uh, uh, plants from being outcompeted by the weeds. In terms of rodent burrows, if you have old, around the home landscape, bunnies may be welcome, but rats and mice are not, So, could be some conflict there. In terms of cavity nesters, one of the things that I do is I tend to like to remove a lot of my plants and collect them in my lawnmower to get rid of all the diseased leaves, so I don't start off the next year with a lot of disease spores at the base. And that process actually removes a lot of the habitat for the stem feeders. So there are ways to approach this in a different manner. Um, Another problem is having logs with holes. I live out in the county, so if I have a big pile of logs, I can hide them behind the shed. Nobody's going to see them. But some folks in more urban areas could have a problem with this sort of a thing. Okay. Uh, Damian Stanziano asked a question for season-long blooms. How many varieties at any one time? How many acres per hive? I have absolutely no idea how to answer that question. Uh, but I would say that mix up, uh, if you can have season-long blooms, that's going to help you. And I'll have some ideas. I'll give you some ideas in a little bit about where to look for more information about this. Okay, so when we think about a pollinator habitat, I like to think in terms of a continuum. So if this is a picture of the Alhambra in Spain, which is a very old garden and a very formal garden, complete with, loop-de-loop little uh, fountains. It's an ultra formal garden, okay, and here, there's not much room to have bare soil and weeds. I mean, and there's not much tolerance for pests in a place like this. Uh, this is downtown Indianapolis along the Cultural Trail. This is a little bit less formal, but it's still a pretty high maintenance garden over here, and they have room for different types of plants, but they do not have a big tolerance for a lot of weeds. Then, of course, uh, so that's sort of in between a formal garden and what a prairie situation. So here's a prairie. So if you want to have the perfect habitat for your pollinators, the Midwest prairie, the Indiana prairie, would be a fantastic place. It's got lots of bare ground. It's got lots of stems that can break, uh, lots of flowers of different types. They bloom on and off throughout the different times of year. So that's what you want to have. But we can't just have everybody's yard turn that into the prairie. We have to have some sort of compromise. So, in order to have a healthy pollinator garden, you want to sort of sit back and ask yourself, what are your objectives? Okay. So if you were a beekeeper and you want to have a lot of habitat, and a lot of pollen for your bees, you're going to want to have as many flowers blooming at any time, all season long as you possibly can. And then the form of the garden would, follow the function. So you would have to have groups of flowers blooming in places that at least would be aesthetically pleasing for you. Now, sometimes if you are designing the garden yourself, you're making the choice. But if you are a landscaper, you talk with your clients and you come up with a strategy. But typically, you're going to use a combination of strategies. So you'll have uh, some plants that are going to be useful for stem nesters, some that'll be useful for maybe have some log areas, for some logs. You're going to have to mix it up a little bit. So let's just start talking about how to get season-long blooms with accessible pollen and nectar. We've got a bulletin called Recommended Indiana Native Plants for Attracting Pollinators. It's pollinator. It's called POL6. Okay, and I've got the link, which I'll put up in the chat at the end of the talk. And what I really like about it is that it's got a plant information that tells you whether it should go in the full sun, part shade, wet, or whatever. And it also talks about how tall the plant's going to be, the flower color, and gives you an approximate bloom time. It then has some columns on the right in pink, which I really like, in that it says which pollinators are attracted to these sorts of things. And then all the way in the right-hand column, they've got something they called pollinator magnets. So you can see that goat's beard uh, has a star in it as a pollinator magnet because it's quite helpful to bees, beetles, and butterflies and moths. So it seems to be having a superabundance of help for a lot of the pollinators. So that's useful. There's another one that I have here. It comes from a book uh, by Margaret Holmes uh, about on bees, and it's got some nice information about native annuals, biennials, and perennials, and it also has got information on when it flowers and a description of this as well. So, there are quite a few links that are available. I'm going to give you a link to this at the end of the talk as well. Now, with that said, everybody likes to talk about natives, but I actually have in my house, I've got a plant called the Seven Suns flowers, Heptacodium myconoides, which, based on some research that was done by my colleague Dan Potter in Kentucky, it attracts quite a few pollinators. It's the one of the biggest pollinator magnets at the end of the season. So I took some photos uh, 2 years ago on a nice sunny day, September 11th of all days, and I saw quite a few things. I saw skipper butterflies feeding on the flowers, uh, and then I found some spotted purples feeding on the flowers, as well as a monarch butterfly, of course. And in this slide here, you can see there is a common sulfur yellow butterfly, but to the left of that is a honeybee. Okay, so the honeybees are attracted to these things as well. I didn't have my camera with me when I was there about a week and a half ago, but it was just, I actually got under the tree and I could hear buzzing like I haven't heard in years. So it was, quite filled. I think I live about 1.5 miles from Brock's bees, so maybe some of them were his. And then, of course, there are bumblebees on here as well. So so even though we are trying an awful lot in order to we're trying to promote native plants, and I think that's a good thing. I think some of these exotics, if they're not invasive, can also be a pretty good resource for pollinators. Now, one of the problems we run into is this problem of sanitation. So there's an insect called the four-line plant bug, which likes to winter in the stems of plants. So it lays its eggs in the stems, and that's how it spends the that's where it spends the winter, and that's a problem because if you leave a lot of stems, you can build up large amounts of these four-line plant bugs. And this is a hydrangea with lots of little holes poked into it. And so sanitation is important. Getting rid of some of those stems is going to help. Another one, which is a real problem in my own landscape, is septoria leaf spot. It's a fungal disease that builds up over time. It's the same kind of a thing that you have on your tomatoes, but this thing just builds up over time. So I taught a class with a plant pathologist, and she convinced me to try mowing my black-eyed Susans and collecting the leaves up in the catcher and then dumping them someplace else. And once I started doing that, I started having a lot fewer problems, and my blooms look much better each year. So other alternatives, if you're using bee balm like Monarda, Monarda is a native one. There are some varieties that get really bad powdery mildew, and some varieties which don't. So just varietal selection, if you can get one which is resistant to powdery mildew, that will help. I didn't have a picture of a resistant and a susceptible Monarda, but I did have one of a peony, just to show you how much the genetics can really help for resistant varieties. So if you can find fungal resistant varieties for the black-eyed Susans and the Monarda, definitely go for that, and that'll allow you to keep more of the plants in the habitat without needing to have that sanitation. So I think we've covered the flowers and keeping that out there and trying to manage it for plant health. Let's talk about nesting sites for soil nesters. So this is a profile of a soil nester. It's a leaf mining bee. And you can see that there are lots of places in residential gardens and lawns. If you've got some bare soil, this is helpful. You'll see in the lower right, you see where the bee is coming out, and on the lower right, you see a little hill which is a nest in the middle of a lawn, and that little hill of sand, it's called a tumulus. These are the things that you really don't want to disturb. So in order to keep these around, you want to minimize tillage to leave the bare ground, and understand that there are some fall to spring nesters and some spring to fall nesters. So if you've got these things coming up in the spring, you may want to wait until midsummer before you cultivate that area, but only try to limit your cultivations to maybe one time a year after the bees have come out. There are some cavity nesters that which like hollow and pithy stems of various diameters. So here is your Serotina, which is the small carpenter bee. This is the poster child for a stem nester. And so in the fall, you'd want to leave perennial stems in place, and you want to cut the stems to varying heights of less than 15 inches tall, so the new growth could cover the old stems from view. And then in the summer, uh, you know, if you provide a bunch of different kinds of pollinators, they'll have a lot of material to work from. So on the left of this slide over here, you see little bits of powder. That's the excavated pith. Pith is the fancy term we use to describe the white stuff in the center of a stem, and they hollow that out and they make their nest inside. This is a really nice graphic for the Heather Holmes, who's the author of the book that I've been borrowing an awful lot from. It says, so basically this is what she suggests. So in the winter, like I'm telling you, is leave dead flower stalks. In the spring, you cut them back with varying sites, and then that allows the female to find the stems and lay eggs inside there. And in the summer, uh, the new growth will hide the stems, but the bee larvae will start to develop. And then in the fall, the bees will hibernate during the winter. And then the following spring, okay, the adult bees will come out. And then, and that's when you can remove the stubble. But that stuff will probably just fall down on its own. So so this is sort of the mechanics of these stem nesters. Now, log nesters, they'll nest in borer holes. So, if you've got some firewood pile, or if you've got some old areas over there, with some old trunks, that's where you want to work and leave those around for them. So, this is my pollinator garden, one of my pollinator gardens, or my flower garden in the summertime. And this is what it looked like yesterday. I took a picture of it. Okay, it's now getting ready for winter. I'm getting ready to prepare. So what I do is I try to implement a mosaic of solutions. I don't completely mow my garden anymore, and I leave some kind of overwintering habit and engage in some practices in different spots all over the garden. So overall, I'll have a nice variety of overwintering habitats and areas that are undisturbed that will allow the pollinators to survive. So here's what I'm going to do is I'm going to only mow about 3/4 of the rudbeckia of these black-eyed Susan to reduce the septorial leaf fungus. And this picture, which I took 2 days ago, shows the septorial leaf fungus on those leaves. And I know that if I let that go year after year, I'm going to have very poor blooms. So I have to do something about it. And I would rotate the areas that I leave each year. Also, I've got some echinacea and some salvia. Echinacea on the left, salvia on the right, and places where we leave those stems open, and these are some nice places for small bees like Serotina. I've also got some bare ground, which I leave there for some soil nesters. So this is another practice that I have. Some areas, though, because I'm trying not to have to hoe and pull weeds all the time, I leave some mulch on there. And that's my weed control. And the mulch is heavy in some spots, light in other spots, but I do use mulch. But and even though the soil nesters can't use that spot, they have enough bare ground to be able to use some of it. So in another garden I have, it's where have a lot of hummingbirds and like inside there. Here you can see, just to see that this is not theory. Here is this is a hawk moth, and a hummingbird just flits inside there too. This is a hawk moth, one of these clearing type hawk moths that flies around, and this is a native phlox that just sort of appeared magically in my garden, which I left. Here is another pollinator, a skipper butterfly, and you can see it taking its mouth part, unfurling its curled mouth part, and dipping it into the corolla of the flower as it moves its way around. You know, so when there's a lot of pollen ready for use for the pollinators, they go to town. Uh, Also in that garden, I have other sorts of plants that I use, and here is on the bottom. Of course, I leave some spots that have bare soil. I have some log piles, which I had a lot of spruce in front of my house, and like most people who had blue spruce, after about 25 or 30 years, they turned into a big brown stems full of fungal infested needles. I took them down and I left them in a pile, and that left an awful lot of bore holes that are useful for pollinators. So at this point in time, I am ready to look at the questions. So on the Q&A, I see no open questions. So I'm ready to take questions from the group. I'll stop
If I'm
sharing.
gonna, as people are, am I unmuted?
Yes, you are.
Can
I
you hear
can
me,
hear
Cliff?
you.
Okay, good. As people are going to type in questions here, I just had a few for you. So I was curious about, so you talked about native versus non-native plants. Oh, I guess I can turn my video on too. You were
Yep.
talking about native versus non-native plants, and I'm curious if you have any native species that you particularly like and that you would recommend people to include in their gardens. This is a selfish question because I'm making a garden right
Well, echinacea is nice, okay? But, one of the things you got to be cautioned with is that I'm trying to think, I think there was some work that was done in Minnesota where they were looking at the attractiveness of pollinators to cultivated plants. There's been some work that's been done on that recently because one of the concerns we have is about the use of pesticides to control other pests. So if you use a neonicotinoid on a plant that's flowering all season long and it's attractive to pollinators, what you have is you got a real pollinator threat. Okay, that's what we want to stop. But there are some of these cultivated varieties don't have a scent, okay, and they're not attracted to pollinators at all. Nothing really visits them. So if you are, so I'll have to do some digging on that and give you a link for that information, Brock. Uh,
Any, I guess specifically, any favorite native pollinators that you would really, you
Bee
like in
balm,
your garden? Bee balm?
yeah,
Okay.
bee
Okay.
balm is great. Monarda is good, and so is echinacea, and
Hmm.
so is rudbeckia. Okay, well, you saw what I like, and the that red flower. I'm trying to get the name of it. It's not coming to my head right now, but I've got yeah. So those, another one I use is I've got a nice vine called it's called the cardinal vine. It's in the morning glory family, so it's with bright red flowers, and in the fall it attracts hummingbirds like crazy. But I just so I would really look at that list of plants that they have, uh, the POL6. That's that's pretty good. And what I like about that is it tells you the color of the flowers
Hmm.
and the height of the plant. Because when you're designing something, you want to design in terms of uh, height and color. So what you want to think of is that in the background, so you want to think of your viewing angle. So if you have a spot where you're going to be sitting like near your patio, in the back of the garden is where you put your tall plants, and you put shorter plants in front of that. And then you think in terms of what is going to be blooming when, and you think about the color pattern. So you would want complementary colors to be happening at the right period of time. So if you've got three things that are blooming in May, June, you'd want them to match and not block each other out. And then because so you wouldn't want something that's going to get really tall and knock out the flower that's lower in the back. So you design in three-dimensional space. And I was talking sometimes with some architects about this sort of a thing. And you want to think about it, a focal plant that sort of attracts your attention, that has interest all season long, and that focuses your view. And then in front of it and behind it, you have plants of varying heights and colors and textures that gives you the effects that you're looking for.
Okay. Wow, free garden advice. I love it. So you're getting some questions here. Do you want me to read them to you, or do you want to go through them?
I've got, here is the link. I think, oh, I see. Is it
Yeah.
possible to print this presentation? I
Maybe give them
guess.
a. Are you putting together any extension documents based on your experience here?
Yes. So what I'm going to do is now that I spent uh, part of the summer and a couple of days putting this thing together, I'm going to write something. That we have a bulletin called the Purdue Landscape Report. And the Purdue Landscape Report has articles twice a month, and I'll be putting something together about creating a pollinator garden sometime this winter. So it'll probably come out in February, is my guess. And then, of course, this is going to be recorded and put on YouTube, right? And yeah. So Julie Patterson, for an urban beekeeper, is there any reason not to attempt to attract other pollinators like those in the soils or stem? Will they compete with my honeybee for a limited resource if my space is small? That's a broad question. I don't know.
Sure, I can take that one. So
Yeah.
is there any reason, so I guess first, is there any reason not to attempt to attract other pollinators like those in soils and stems? I mean, the one main reason that people tend to frown at attracting pollinators to their garden is the sting risk. So this one's kind of aside from a beekeeper, but the likelihood of getting stung by these solitary nesting bees is incredibly low. There's actually a really rather wonderful scientific report where researchers went out to a large aggregation of soil nesting bees, and they collected them for hours and hours, and they recorded how often they got stung. And after many people hours collecting, I think they only had about one sting, and that was because the researcher accidentally closed her hand too quickly. So you're very unlikely to get stung by these things if you were worried about that. On this, oh, sorry, Cliff, go ahead.
Yeah, even cicada killer wasps.
Right.
I had a whole gang of like 6 people in my lab go to a site that was filled with these things, and we spent like an hour and a half sweeping and nobody got stung. They're scary, but they're not.
Yeah.
They don't want anything to do with you.
And then, so to answer that question, more for the beekeepers in the audience, which I think is your second part here, will they compete with my honeybees for limited resources? So if you have a honeybee colony in the middle of a patch of pollinator garden, your honeybees are less likely to be on that patch. They prefer to go a little bit far and collect pollen and nectar. And they also prefer large, what's the way to put this? They prefer larger sources of pollen and nectar. So if there's a big tree blooming, they'll love that versus a small patch of pollinator plants in a garden next door to them. Will they compete? A little bit, but the amount of competition from honeybee, sorry, from a native bee on a honeybee is much smaller than the other way around. So honeybees actually tend to compete with the native bees to a much larger degree than the other way around. So I'll just say that one's answered live.
Great.
And then Chris, Cliff, you got a bunch more here too.
Okay, yeah. So Donna Allen had a question about prairie type habitat for wildflowers. What about controlled burns and mowing for weed control? Okay, so just like I will not mow, actually, I'll be absolutely truthful. I have always mowed down all my rudbeckia, okay? And after putting this together, I'm going to stop doing that. I'm going to change. See, I learned from my own stuff. So I still have lots of pollinators, but I think that what I'm going to do is I'm just going to mow. If I mow 3/4 of it and leave a quarter of it to be alone for a whole year, that will increase the number of stem nesting bees that can use those things as habitats. All right, and then what I'll do is I'll cut it down a little bit, but leave some of the stems of varying heights. So there's lots of different types of habitat. So use that same principle for burns. My wife and some friends, they have a cooperative. They have a piece of land and they have a prairie. They have 100-acre prairie that they manage. And what they do, and they work with the niches folks, which is the Northern Indiana uh, Conservation Habitat Group. And what they do is they will only burn it. Uh, they burn certain sections of the prairie each year or on a rotation. So they're not going to burn everything every single year. They're just going to burn it on a calendar, and they will move on certain different parts of it. And it's set up in a way that the entire thing doesn't have to burn all at the same time. Okay, there's fire breaks and things along those sorts of things. Same thing for mowing. So think about mowing uh, like a 3-year rotation or a type of a thing. So if you can stagger your mowing times of plants that have to be mowed, you're always going to have stems that last that whole year. Because remember, they will in the springtime they colonize. They put the eggs inside the stems. Then they provision them all summer long, and then in the following spring, that's when they come out to find another nest. All right. So you want to have them undisturbed for at least for over a year. Okay. So 1 year you just leave them alone. And yeah, yeah, that sounds good. Now, yeah, and in terms of managing the invasives, when the invasives take hold, uh, you know, that's where you have to decide, well, what's the greater threat to my patch? If you have a situation where the invasives are going to completely take over, then you just got to just get rid of those invasives because those pollinators aren't going to do well on those invasives. So you may as well just get rid of the invasives so you can allow those pollinator plants to do well. Okay, Russ. Okay, borage in the Tippecanoe Extension Center. I forget what the borage flower looks like. Um, but I'm sure that if there's a borage uh, and they like it, then if you're seeing them on it, then they're on it. I don't know what else to say. Uh, all of a sudden, I just celosia coxcombs are that red flower that I had in my garden. Those are coxcombs. There's an amazing amount of pollinators that are on there. I saw Aglacorella on that one over there. It's the one of these nesters, ground nesters. But I also saw a robber fly, uh, which is a large fly on there, and it was moving very slowly. And I took a real close look. It had an Aglacorella bee in its mouth. So there are a lot of predators on there too. So these native bees, when they get onto these flower patches, uh, there are lots of predators waiting to eat them as well. But if you got a lot of flowers, there'll be enough for everybody. Okay, Russ Littenser had a question. Maybe too esoteric for this forum, but any suggestions for buffer plants or pollinator plantings that help support food for omnivorous pollinators such as parasitic wasps? Well, it's not too esoteric for this forum. Years ago, I had a project where we were trying to determine whether or not uh, you could increase biocontrol of common pests of, say, bagworms, which are a caterpillar which feed on spruce trees, and scale insects by planting flowers around the plants. And we found that if you have a diversity of flowers, different flower shapes and flower sizes, you can really increase the amount of parasitization that we had. So we actually lowered the populations of euonymus scales. And one of the really good pollen plants for that is happens to be white clover. Is a pretty good one. That attracts that. So the other thing we found is we actually did a spatial analysis of this, and we found that initially the abundance of the parasites is increased for up to 10 meters away from the planting. So it's a 30-foot or so area. But what happened is because we had plantings in lots of different areas, and over time, the population of parasites got so high that it just dropped down the entire populations. So it kind of messed up our treatments because we had no flowers, medium, and high flowers. But overall, it's quite effective. So so anything that you're doing, so it's interesting. I work with this research group on ornamentals, and we were talking an awful lot about how to about making landscapes healthier for bees. And we joked around, we called it our Trojan horse for biological control. So, under the guise of making habitats good for pollinators, we are also making habitats good for parasites, because everything that the pollinators need is also needed by for beneficial insects. Beneficial insects use nectar as a sugar source. They use pollen as a protein source, and they also feed on insects as well. So, if you're trying to grow a colony of ladybugs, you need to throw pollen in there, or they're not going to reproduce. So they are, a lot of these predators are omnivores, and they really rely on pollen and nectar. So it's not too esoteric at all. You kind of get two for the price of one.
Awesome, thanks, Cliff. There was a comment here in the chat from Joan Moore Samuels, and Joan says, wingstem, great blue lobelia, ironweed, and milkweed are very popular with pollinators on her yard. There's a comment there on those ones.
Great. Yeah, no, well, this is another thing, milkweeds. I had I went out and I spent $20 on a swamp milkweed, and I put it in the middle of my rutabaga in my black-eyed Susans. And I was there, and sure enough, by the end of the summer, the monarchs found it. And I had 15 monarch caterpillars on that one plant. And they all starved to death because they ate it and killed it. So, have a patch of milkweeds. Okay.
That's a very good point.
Have a patch. That's really important for that one over there. And also another thing is that, it reminds me of a story. I was driving into Bloomington about maybe 7 or 8 years ago, and they had a rain garden and a pollinator garden, and had a big patch of milkweeds and all this sort of stuff. And my wife, who went to IU, she says, "What's those weeds doing in the middle of the center of the city over here next to the sculptures?" I said, "Well, that's a pollinator garden." They go, "Really?" And I think that if you are doing any kind of public gardening and that sort of a thing, signage is really, really important. You want to tell people what they're looking at. It's been my experience that people are willing to accept just about anything if you tell them what you're doing when it comes to plants. You're saying, "Oh, well, I'm just trying to protect the monarch butterflies." They say, "Oh, well, sure, plant them away." Yeah. And now these ugly milkweed plants, these that you see in the ditch, these ditch milkweed plants, I happen to like what they look like, but they are now, they're now something that's positive. So they associate it with the butterflies, and they associate it with the healthy pollinators, and people are willing to accept it. So signage is really important, or letting people know. If people over to visit, they say, "What do you got all those weeds for?" You go, "Well, they're not weeds. I'm feeding the pollinators because I like them." Yep.
So Cliff, just as some more questions filter in here, I'm just going to drop in the chat for those who've taken part here today. We do have a little survey we like you to take, and I'm just going to drop that in there if you want to take it at your convenience.
Okay.
And as I drop that in the chat, Cliff, I had one more question for you on my list here, and that was about those pollinator seed mixes that we can purchase at Lowe's or Home Depot. Not to call out those two specifically, but you've seen these pollinator seed mixes, and I'm wondering if you have any experience with those.
Okay. I'm just hold on a second. I'm putting the link to the book on pollinators to
Thank you.
all panelists. I don't know how to give it to everybody. Sorry. Okay.
I got
So
it there.
good. All right. So go on that link. You get all those information for those books that I was showing you. Okay. So the question was about. I'm sorry, I lost it.
Do you have any experience with those commercially available seed mixes that one can buy at the
Okay.
counter of large
Okay.
stores?
So we had a nice little discussion about this in this pest management research group we have of IPM coordinators. And you have no idea what's inside those mixes. Okay. So I would, unless they tell you what's inside there, if they say common flowering plants, some of those could be noxious weeds. And some of the noxious weeds that they're really trying to control agriculturally, these invasives, have moved around quite readily like this. There's another story I want to mention is that this spring there were some plants. There was a bag of seeds that were sent with a postmark from China to people all over the United States that contained seeds. And we in the extension told everybody, don't plant those things because we don't know what they are. You could be spreading invasive species all over the place. And they actually wound up sending them to an address, an animal plant health inspection service person down near Indianapolis, and they're just going to try and find out what they are. But that was a terrible thing. So, if any of you has ever grown mint, you say, friends don't give friends mint to grow in their garden because what happens is that it just takes over. Okay, so so that plant which looks great, typically this is typical for homeowners. When I did the same thing when I first moved into my house, I planted plants. They said they're invasive. Oh, I don't care; they'll grow real fast. Well, you do care after 15 or 20 years because those little things start getting annoying and they pop up just about everywhere. So be careful about what you plant. You might get more than what you bargain for.
Thanks, Cliff. There's one more popped up in the chat here from Catherine DeVere, and Catherine is wondering, are Queen Anne's lace useful?
Oh, they're very useful. What I always find is really interesting is that they actually have that little black, like a little purple flower right in the center of it, which sort of acts as a signal to individuals. Pollinators are looking for a place that is active that says, oh, this is so good, somebody is already here. You better come here and pollinate me. So these are really good because they're flat flowers and they're used for a lot of the fly pollinators will use that. Flower flies, which also double as predators of aphids, use these, quite extensively as well.
Great. Thanks, Cliff. So I guess we can take more questions. Cliff, do you have any final thoughts here? Anything that you want to end on? Any major takeaways that you want people to remember?
Yes. Okay. So first of all, when you're gardening, make sure you're having fun or you're doing it the wrong way. Second, is that when it comes to coming up with a solution and integrating it into your garden, go slowly. If somebody says, let's use sanitation to get rid of all our pests, use that in certain areas, and so that the chances of you making very large mistakes decreases if you implement new strategies in small areas of your garden. Okay, so diversify your implementation of new ideas, and then be aware that there's a wide variety of pollinators out there. So the wider variety of plants that you have, the more likely that you're going to have pollen out there for these pollinators when they're in your area. And same thing goes for the different sorts of nesting sites, be it bare ground, or stems, logs, and whatever.
Okay, well, great. If there are no more questions for Cliff, then I just ask that people fill out that little survey that we sent out. I'll do it one more time here in the chat. And
A question: how
oh,
to
there we
find
go.
YouTube videos of the presentations?
Oh, thanks, Patty. Yeah, so we will be sending links out to all registrants for these talks, and those YouTube videos will be up on. And Eric's probably gonna jump in and correct me. They're either on Purdue Extension, I believe they're on Purdue's Extension YouTube channel, and you will get links if you're a registrant to these talks. So
Yeah, we'll
it
talk
just
about
takes a little bit of time. Sorry, Cliff.
yeah, we'll talk about make sure we get together, make sure we put the right keywords on that thing so they get. You know
Yeah.
more about that than I do, but yeah, we got to get that going. Sorry.
Yeah, so what we'll do, we'll send out those links. It just takes a little bit of time to edit if there's some dead space. So as soon as Eric edits those, we put those up and we send out links to the registrants. So thanks, Patty. Okay, well, thanks again, everyone. This was really great. Look forward to see you all, or to chatting with you all next week, where we talk about, I believe it is honey production and honey extraction. So we've got a nice lineup of beekeepers with a diverse array of experience. We've got people that collect and extract honey from their rooftop colonies, and they do it in one-bedroom apartments. And we've got commercial beekeepers here in Indiana who work with thousands of pounds of honey a year. So it should be kind of a fun chat next week. So thanks again, Cliff, and thanks again, everyone, for taking part.
You're welcome. Have a good week.